from Alabama for 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman and thank the witnesses for being here. Just listening to the testimony raises some serious concerns. I really appreciate testimony of Ms. Ween about this massive advertising campaign by plaintiff attorneys and how it has impacted science and I think it's leading to some major problems for the national economy, but also for our national security, because in denying us access to certain key materials. But I'd also like to address the testimony of Ms. Lucas about how these lawsuits are impacting the state's ability to self-govern. Our Constitution reserves most of the powers for government to the states. And is it your experience in Minnesota that you've got outside groups, and in some cases federal agencies, basically usurping the authority of the state and overturning state laws in regard to the management of your own resources?
Thank you for the question. In Minnesota, some of our environmental regulations the state has the authorization for them, but in some cases we do still have federal agencies that will have the oversight and issue the permits. For example, our wetland permits under the 404 Clean Water. And so we have not had that happen as far as the way you described it, but we have had the challenge of getting our federal permits through after we already do have our state permits.
You also have a situation where the federal government has shut down our nation's largest reserve of cobalt. Isn't that true?
I cannot speak if the Twin Metals project is the one you're referencing. I'm not sure that that's the largest cobalt, but I will get back to you on that one.
It is.
It is a significant resource.
I believe it's the largest U.S. Reserve of cobalt, which is absolutely critical to the Democrat agenda for completely restructuring our power grid and going to all renewables, which will be an economic and national security disaster because it makes us 100% reliant on China. I want to address a couple of other things, and this has to do is in the context of sue and settle. One of the things, I ran a think tank for almost 24 years, and one of the issues that we addressed was how state legislatures could protect themselves from consent decrees, from sue and settle. Otherwise, I think a lot on the left call it institutional reform litigation. And the thing is that if any of you were elected to a state office, attorney general, governor, mayor, local office like mayor or county commission, and you wanted to know how much you were spending on consent decrees, unless you know the case number, there's no federal database that would provide you with that information. One of the things that, and I will say this in a bipartisan way, that this Congress has passed is the Settlement Agreement Information Database, so that we have a clearer picture of all of these settlement agreements and what they're costing us. Do you think that would be of any help to any of you, and any of you can respond to this in regard to addressing this issue of institutional litigation, otherwise known as consent decrees?
Thank you, Congressman. I would say that oftentimes it's too late if you're just looking at the research and the data to see, what the trend is for sue and settle type agreements or settlements. I think our concern is that you have subject matter that's under litigation, and the settlement ultimately expands way beyond that. Unknowingly to the public, and a regulated community has to end up abiding by it. So it's sometimes it's good to have the information and data to follow those trends, and there's probably some good think tanks out there to do that work so that they can then engage with Congress.
Well, there really isn't, because unless you know the case number, there's no way to know how many of these consent decrees are out there. And consent decrees not only an expense, it's also a form of legislating through a special master or through a control group, which again, I think, in my opinion, is a threat to representative government, because nobody elected these people to do this. They circumvent the legislative process. So I think it's extremely important that we have some ability to know what we're dealing with in terms of these settlement agreements. And I think clarity on the part of the federal government would be a huge help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes